Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm Jeff Pender, joined here with my colleague, Taylor Vance.
Hey,
Taylor,
Jeff. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here, too. And we have a very special guest today. A lot of folks in the political arena would know him and may not know that he is a Jackson, Mississippi native, I believe. But Stuart Stevens has once been described as the most successful Republican political operative of his generation. However, I guess maybe in recent...
You don't have to rub it in, Jeff.
Okay, maybe in recent times, he and the party have maybe even parted ways, I believe. But Stuart, as I said, is a native of Jackson. For many years, he was a top Republican campaign strategist and consultant. He is the author of, Stuart, I tried to count them all up on Amazon. I got 9 maybe. He's a best-selling New York Times author, notably wrote It Was All a Lie, a really big blockbuster book. More recently, and some things we may touch on today, he authored The Conspiracy to End America, 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Our Democracy to Autocracy. Anyway, Stuart, I could go on and on, but we really appreciate you coming on today.
Listen, man, thank you, and congrats to everything you guys are doing at Mississippi Today. It's really extraordinary. It's one of the great success stories in the country. I talk about it. I talk about it all the time when people get down on, but the future of journalism. That really what you guys are doing is the bright spot, the positive future of journalism. And it's pretty extraordinary. So all credit due to you guys.
Well, thanks. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Stuart, you and I just spoke very briefly before this, but as we record this, kind of on the eve of a big event coming up, the military parade on Saturday in D.C., and of course this week a lot of us have been riveted by Marines landing in Los Angeles and events going on there. Can you give us your quick take, hot take on that?
I actually think the big event of the week so far has been Trump's speech at Fort Bragg, which, I never was in the military. My dad was, but I follow a lot of the people who I really respect, like former generals like Barry McCaffrey, Mark Hertling. And I think it's really fascinating the degree to which they say that this is one of the more troubling and appalling events of their lifetime with the military. And these are guys who lived through the Vietnam War and were part of that whole generation. To have Donald Trump give a campaign rally where they're selling MAGA swag at a military base completely violates the principle of what the American military has always been. And we are unique in that you take an oath to the Constitution, not to a leader. And what I find so distressing about this is not what Donald Trump is doing, but the fact that so few people are speaking out. And I think it's a really specific interest to Mississippians now, because Roger Wicker, my old friend and client, is chairman of the Armed Services Committee. So if there is a powerful voice that could be speaking out on this, I would like to hear more from him. Now, Roger is not a grandstander. He's a guy who likes to work behind the scenes, but I think that there's times when it's important to show people that those that are in the American mainstream still, who are the adults in the room, are concerned about things and are speaking out.
Stuart, you mentioned Senator Wicker. My understanding to date, his only The only comments I've seen about this is him questioning the expense of the parade. I've not seen him questioning the optics or the greater.
It's just, look, I mean, we all grew up watching this happen in North Korea and in Russia. And, you know, as far as role models go, I just wouldn't put North Korea and Moscow up there as, you know, the aspirations that we should assert to. You know, what Trump does is he pushes and he pushes and he pushes until he hits strength that pushes back. The classic bully syndrome. Republican Congress has allowed itself to, in essence, be disqualified in this conversation. I've never seen anything like it. These men and women, they spend all this time trying to get elected to Congress and the Senate. Now they're in Congress and the Senate, and they're not doing anything. They're just a rubber stamp. And I know a lot of these people. I helped elect a good number of them. And I just find it extraordinary. Most of these people would not hire, say, a Pete Hegseth to cut their lawn. I mean, literally, you wouldn't want this guy. He's got this drinking problem, this bad history. He shows up with all these tattoos. You wouldn't want him around the house. And now they're turning over the most powerful military in the history of the world to this, you know, weird weekend anchor on Fox with the drinking problem. It's just crazy. So, you know, we have these three branches of government, and we're seeing two of those branches, I think, really abdicating a lot of their power. Congress most certainly, and I think the Supreme Court, when they say there's basically nothing illegal that Donald Trump can do as president, they've abdicated a lot of their role.
Yeah. Stuart, you know, when I talk to a lot of, you know, campaign officials or staffers, you know, and you ask them, well, why is your boss not speaking up more? And they will say, well, I mean, really, if we do, we're toast. You know, he's gone. I mean, you look at a lot of the people who have stood up to the president, and he's done. They're gone. Yeah, and I know, but I'm not advocating that, you know, that politicians, public officials, you know, shouldn't stand up just on principle and do, you know, what should be right to, you know, to defend core values of democracy. But I guess my question is, how do we sort of work ourselves out of this sort of conundrum?
I have zero respect for that opinion. I mean, look, I am of a generation that was a son of the greatest generation. I mean, my dad fought in the South Pacific 3 years, 28 island landings. No one is asking these members of Congress to charge a beach or to take a machine gun. They have to get their comm shop to put out statements. That's a pretty low bar in the history of defending America. So it is also, they took an oath to do this. So I have no sympathy. If they lose a primary, they lose a primary. But Roger Wicker, for instance, his next primary is in 6 years. I think you could maybe, you know, work things out between then. But so what? You lose a primary. I mean, really? Go to Arlington, go to Normandy. People paid a lot more price for this. So I think there are a bunch of, what's proven is that there's something in the Republican Party, and this pains me to say, that has drawn a group of particularly weak people. And when you stand, we used to say this, you know, when you only stand for election, you don't stand for anything. And so I think they're a bunch of cowards, and I think they ought to be called out. And I don't think they're patriots. I don't think that you can call yourself a patriot and vote to confirm Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. And you can't call yourself a patriot and support someone that puts Laura Loomer in decision making for key policy decisions. This isn't what patriots do. And it's not about policy. There are plenty of super conservative individuals who could have been Secretary of Defense. Look at Tulsi Gabbard, who's basically But she is. She's a Moscow mouthpiece. And it's extraordinarily dangerous. Somehow we lose track of the narrative here. There is no question that the Russians helped elect Donald Trump in 2016. The Republican-led by Marco Rubio Senate Intelligence Committee, that was their thing. We can argue about whether or not it was decisive, but you never know what's decisive in politics. It's always the most difficult thing to say. But we know that they tried to elect him. We know he won. What did they get? It's the most successful covert operation in the history of the world. They got a president of the United States. So how does that play out? Well, we see it playing out now. The core of the most strong opposition to the Soviet Union, strong against Russia, the beating heart of that was the conservative element of the Republican Party. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And that element now has become the beating heart of the pro-Putin movement in American politics. And it's like nothing we've ever seen. It's as if Churchill decided, well, maybe Nazis are good. We somehow just don't talk about that enough. It's really not complicated. And I think that the Republican Party has become compromised. And you look at key elements of the Republican Party like the NRA and their direct ties to Russia. You look at the connections that so many of these people have to Russia. And the fact that if you are afraid to stand up to someone like Donald Trump, who is taking Putin's side in many of these, then you've been compromised. So I'm pretty harsh on this and pretty unforgiving. If only because I sat in the rooms and I sat in the cars and I sat in their homes and their offices and I listened to these people say that they believed in core values that they now haven't just drifted away from, they're actively opposing. And I find it extraordinarily distressing on a personal level. And it's really what led me to write this book, It Was All a Lie. And I feel responsible for this. There's a whole trope of books that people write involved in politics, like if only they had listened to me. I couldn't write that book. They did listen to me. And one of the things that drew me to the Republican Party was this sense of personal responsibility. So when I wrote It Was All a Lie, the first sentence is basically blame me. I was part of this. I should have seen it. And I didn't. And the only reason that I'm still involved in politics now at a time when I thought I'd just be out writing books is because I do feel responsible. And I don't know what to do about it except to try to use some of the skills that I had developed and helping elect these people and trying to bring some sanity to our politics.
And a more recent book you authored, The Conspiracy to End America, I remember thinking, well, maybe Stuart's really being way hyperbolic here. But as a little time has gone on, I'm not so sure. Some of it has...
Yeah, I would say if you go back and read that book, I think, Jeff, the question would be, why was this guy such an optimist?
Right. Maybe so. Maybe so.
Like,
One thing from there, I think in that book you had said that when a democracy devolves into an autocracy, there are 5 elements: financiers, propagandists, party support, legal theories to legitimize what they're doing, and shock troops.
They're all there. And, part of the difficulty here, which you really hit on, is how to talk about this and not sound crazy and not sound extremist. But look, I came from the mainstream of the mainstream of the mainstream of the Republican Party, right? I worked for 5 presidential candidates. I helped elect governors and senators and over half Republicans in over half the country, right? I helped elect some of the most conservative members of the U.S. Senate. I didn't really do many congressional races. My shift here is not ideological. I think that the Republican Party is a anti-conservative party. Say what you will, and I spent 25 years pointing out flaws in the Democratic Party. I think that it is still remains now the only pro-democracy party in America. And it's, you go back and there's a guy named Joe Trippi that works in the Lincoln Project who was, I think, the most successful Democrat consultant of his era. I used to hate to go against the guy. He was like really good. And, we were laughing about this thing. Like, what did we used to fight about? Like, we used to fight about what was the capital gains tax going to be? Like 34 or 28, I mean, it's like quaint. And what are we arguing about now? Whether or not there should be Marines going through my neighborhood in Santa Monica. Marines, the Battle of Brentwood is underway. And, whether or not we should have a May Day parade in Washington, and whether or not there's a good side and a bad side when a dictator is invading a European democracy in a war of genocide. That's not ideological. That's basic values. And it really comes down to, do you believe there's something that defines being an American besides just a place on the map with a flag? And I do. I'm with Ronald Reagan on this. And America's a shining city on the hill. And Donald Trump has a very different view, and therefore the Republican Party has a very different view, because the Republican Party supports Donald Trump. America is a place we're at war. We are the chumps of the world, where these powerful countries out there like Canada are taking advantage of us. For Reagan to be born in America was to have won life's lottery. There was inequalities in America, but nobody was disadvantaged because they were born an American. In Donald Trump world, he's going to settle the score for the world out there taking advantage of Americans. And I think that's a fantasy. We're the most powerful country in the world. We have the greatest economy. We are certainly flawed. But, the time to worry about America is not when you have lots of people trying to come to America. The time to worry is when those people stop trying to come to America. Because there's not a lot of people trying to get into North Korea. And, Moscow doesn't have a big immigration problem.
Stuart, shortly before we came on, you mentioned to us you've seen some new polling recently. What is it showing? What's all this? What's the impact on them?
It's really interesting because I think you look at the White House, they think that they're winning because they are living out the fantasies that they've had, like a Stephen Miller, who, everybody here should go on that thing called the internet and Google Stephen Miller High School. And there is this extraordinary clip of Stephen Miller at a high school, Santa Monica High School, which is down the street from my house in Santa Monica, where he is up in front of a school assembly attacking the custodians because they don't do a good enough job picking up the trash, and students are actually being expected to do some of that. And he gets booed off the stage by his own peers. That's a sick puppy. And he hasn't changed. And, Trump is surrounded by the broken toys. There's just people that are using politics to work through deep personal issues, and that's not a good thing. So they think that they're winning. And the Quinnipiac came out, and Trump he's way underwater. He's underwater, which is to say he's in negative. His job approval is 39, which is the lowest of any president at this point in a presidency in modern history. Usually, after the first 100 days, presidents go up, and they have a higher favorable than they did on election day, which makes sense. It's a very American thing. Okay, I didn't vote for the guy, but I want to give him a chance. So, Joe Biden had 59% favorable at this point. Obama was almost 70. George Bush, in both terms, was higher than what he got on election day. And Trump is losing immigration. Trump is losing, which is, if I was in the White House, I would be deeply worried about that. I think what's happened here is, if you go back to the campaign, and the campaign was run by competent professionals who I know well and have worked with, right? They knew that Project 2025 was poison. And that's why they denied all connection to it. Now they're making America drink the poison of Project 2025, and it's not going down any easier. And what did Trump say he was going to do on immigration? He's going to arrest violent criminals. What are they doing? They're sending masked men and dressed in stuff you can buy off of eBay. And where are they going? We say all these immigrants, they're just a drag on our society and they're not contributing. And where are they going? They're going to workplaces. They're arresting them at their jobs where they pay Social Security and they pay taxes and they don't get benefits. So they're not doing what they said. And I thought in the fall, and I thought last year during the campaign, I said this, and I think it's proving to be true. The image in America of masked men demanding your papers is very unsettling. And just as an aside, I'd ask everybody listening out there, if you were stopped in the next 20 minutes, what do you have on you that proves you're a U.S. citizen? It's not your driver's license, even one of these fancy new ones. It's not your Social Security card. All of that can be obtained by non-citizens. You have to have a passport or a birth certificate. Only half of Americans even have a passport. And how many are walking around? So we're really going to enter a world where you have to think, well, wait a second, I'm going out of the house. I better get my passport. Well, the truth is that probably you and I aren't going to have to worry about it because, we're not Hispanic. But it is deeply, deeply troubling. And I think that there are certain Christian values here that are really being violated. What we're seeing is deliberate cruelty for the sake of cruelty. It is to frighten people. And, I don't think the majority of Americans believe that's what this country's about. And, you go back, there's another piece of video that I just would urge everybody to go. 1980, there was a debate between Ronald Reagan and George Bush still when they were fighting out the primary down in Texas, where they're basically arguing over who was more liberal on immigration. You watch this thing, and it's like you found something from a lost civilization. It's like stumbling across something, a debate among the Aztecs on human sacrifice. And George Bush gets asked a question, what are you going to, do you think, and it was a very pointed question. It was clear the person asking had a point of view, which is good. Basically, do you really believe that those who are in the country illegally should go to public schools? And Bush gives, I think, the conservative answer. They're here. What are we going to do? Do we want to have an underclass that is going to be a drain on society? Or do we want to have people who can participate and let's try to work this out? And that was a conservative position. And Ronald Reagan in 1986 signed a bill that made everybody in the country legal before 1983. And Ronald Reagan announced in front of the Statue of Liberty in 1980 as an ode to immigration. His last speech in office was a tribute to immigration, that you can live all your life in France and never be a Frenchman if you weren't born there. That only an American can you come here and be an American. And I don't understand how this happens. I look at somebody like J.D. Vance, right? Okay, he's married to an anchor baby. His wife's parents were not U.S. citizens when she was born. So they now want to do away with birthright citizenship. I say, great, let's make it retroactive. Let's make J.D. Vance's wife illegal, which makes their kids illegal. Let's deport them all. Let's just be consistent about this. And it's, I think, abhorrent. There's been a great failure in immigration law. There was a consensus bill of conservatives and liberals before the election that could have been passed that Donald Trump stopped. That would have been the toughest immigration bill. So there's a huge problem. But what are you going to do with 11 million people? Or more than that? What are you going to do? You can pass laws that make it illegal for them to get sick. You can pass laws that make it illegal for them to be in car accidents. But I don't think it's going to work. So what are they going to do when they get sick? They're going to end up at the emergency room. It's the single most expensive point of delivery of healthcare in America. Who's going to pay for that? You're going to pay for it. And there has to be an ability to talk about these problems that is nonpartisan. And there's been efforts to. And now that's been completely blown up by Donald Trump and Stephen Miller. And, you know, what's going to happen if ICE sweeps through Mississippi chicken farms? How's that going to work out?
Stuart, are we anywhere near a tipping point with the American public, with congressional leaders? Are we anywhere near seeing a shift in that? Or
well, look, I had a going out of business sale that was very painful of any optimism about the Republican Party. You know, a party that doesn't have a room for Cheney. I mean, I work closely with Vice President Cheney in his debate prep and with Liz Cheney, right? Cheney, he's not a conservative. Liz Cheney isn't a conservative. Really? Are you serious? Dick Cheney, who was one of 12 to vote against banning plastic guns, he's not a conservative. You know, I mean, and so think about it. On January 6th, Donald Trump was largely responsible for a violent mob coming into the workplace of these congressmen and senators and trying to hang Mike Pence. And they still say it's okay. So once somebody comes into your workplace and tries to kill your colleagues and you say, that's okay, dude, don't worry. We really think some point of principle is going to be, all right, that's gone too far, you know, like that position you've taken on the law of the sea treaty. That's it, man. I'm sorry. You know, I know you tried to kill the vice president, but no, they're not anything they're going to do. And I can't tell you the degree that this pains me, embarrasses me, and troubles me. The only way you're going to do it is to defeat these Republicans. So Republicans are going to lose the House in 2016. And if I was running the Democratic Party, God help me, the first bill I would introduce is to cut off all spending for the executive branch. Democrats have to get out of the mode that they're a governing party. You know, I don't know if you read The Bulwark, but Jonathan Last, who, you know, deeply conservative guy, he came out of the Weekly Standard. He wrote, I think, a piece about 6 weeks ago that's going to be one of these pieces we're going to look back on for years. And he made the point that we can't, this whole anti-Trump thing, we can't think of ourselves as like a governing party. We have to think of ourselves as a dissident movement. And that's really what it has to be. And I think the Democratic Party is still living in a fantasy. And, you know, you look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk and Doge have probably broken more laws and faster than any like moment in American history in our politics. So he's obviously a deeply unstable guy. When you have the Wall Street Journal and New York Times writing in-depth investigative reporting on your drug use, it's hard to dismiss it as ideological. A guy who is calling for Trump to be impeached last week, who calls on Donald Trump to release the Epstein files. And I don't think it's a coincidence that hours later, this whole thing in LA broke out. That guy runs Starlink and he runs SpaceX, two key national security institutions, companies, organizations. What Democrats should do is they should say, okay, Republicans say we're at war. Fine, we'll accept that. We're going to nationalize Starlink and SpaceX under the Defense Procurement Act. And they should try to do it. They have to start playing it at that level. Otherwise, you're not effective. I mean, Chuck Schumer, really? I mean, it's just not, they're failing. But I think they're going to lose the House. And my personal view of this is that the last presidential election is greatly misunderstood. On election day, the job approval of the incumbent president was 40. In the history of American politics, no incumbent party has gotten more than 2 points higher than what the incumbent president got in job approval. So Democrats actually did a good bit better. The right track, wrong track question, do you think the country's headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? The right track was 27. 27. No one has ever, incumbent parties ever won when it was lower than 45. You know, when I did Bush in 2000, worked on that campaign, we watched consumer confidence. I mean, on an election day, consumer confidence was the highest it had ever been on an election day since we've been tracking consumer confidence, which it kind of ticked up right at the end, which is probably what threw us into this terrible situation in Florida. Because people forget, Bush won or lost 7 states for a total of under 15,000 votes. We talk about Florida. We lost New Mexico by 300 votes. We lost Iowa by 1,000. So a very close election. So this is an election a challenger should have won. And you look at the polling on Nikki Haley, she was doing a lot better. And that should not be confused with an endorsement of Trumpism. And I think this is how societies end up worshiping volcanoes. There's a drought, the volcano belches and it rains, and the next thing you know, you're throwing virgins into the volcano. No, they're not related. And I think that's the problem Republicans have, and I think it's beginning to scare Republicans who are up for election in anything close to a swing district. Bacon and Nebraska is an example. That people don't like this. What did they vote for? Did they vote for chaos? Did they vote to walk into Walmart and pay more? No, I don't think so. Donald Trump said he'd end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. How's that going? You've had the most violent, highest casualty rate of innocent citizens since Donald Trump has been president, since this awful war started when Russians invaded. So I don't think they voted to send Marines into downtown LA. I mean, I don't know if it's a curfew in downtown LA right now. I don't know if you've ever been in downtown LA after 8 o'clock. There's pretty much a curfew every night because nobody goes into downtown LA after dark because there's nothing to do in downtown LA if there's not a game on at the arena. They're just manufacturing these problems. Barack Obama and Joe Biden deported over 4 million people. Donald Trump deported 1.7 million in his first term. He was a failure at immigration. And it's a failure of the Democratic Party that they don't hammer this point. So I think people are troubled by chaos, and that's what we're getting here. And I really think the image of president, now we're going to reinstate these Confederate names for bases. I mean, look, I'm a 7th generation Mississippian named for Jeb Stuart. So, it's not like I'm coming at this from some, unsympathetic to the South viewpoint, to white South. But yeah, we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be stepping back. And they've come up with this absurd reason, well, they're not really naming them for these names, they're naming it for soldiers that had the same name that they've dug up. I mean, it's absurd. So I still bet on America. And I think you could accuse Joe Biden of betting too much on America. And we should have had trials for Donald Trump and let the legal system settle it. We had one. He was found guilty on every count. But it was a failure. So what is conservative about pardoning violent criminals that attack police officers? I mean, how is that the Republican Party? How do they go along with it? And every Republican office holder who's silent on that supports it. It's not enough just to say, well, know in your heart I wouldn't have done that. Or, when you sit in a room with fundraiser or around your dinner table and your family's asking what the hell, you go, well, I wouldn't have done it. That's not enough. You got to call it out. I mean, there's a very interesting book that a Canadian journalist, Stephen Marsh, very serious guy, wrote a few years ago. And he makes the argument that America is in a civil war. And it's just slow moving. And I find that very difficult to grasp, but he makes the point, what's the difference between Fort Sumter and January 6th? Nobody died at Fort Sumter. And it's an interesting question. But if you remember in 2016, when people like Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio were running against Donald Trump, they all said this is the death of conservatism if we elect this guy. And they were right. So I think probably we're going to elect a Democrat president in the next election. And I think we'll probably elect a Democrat president in 32. And I think that there is a need for a center-right party in America, and we don't have that now. And we're going to have to find a way to organize a center-right party that can answer the question pretty directly, who started the war in Ukraine?
Stuart, turning towards Mississippi, do you think that there's a realistic way that a Democratic challenger could sort of channel and capture some of that national dissatisfaction in the polling that you referenced? I mean, if you were advising Democratic challengers, what would you be telling them?
Well, look, it's always been harder to elect Republicans in Mississippi than it looks like. I worked for Haley Barbour, and when Haley Barbour ran against Governor Musco in that race, everybody who knew Haley in Washington, he's such a big personality. They were like, hey, guys, why aren't you 10 points ahead? And it's like, look, depending on turnout, you got to get 70% of the white vote. And as Haley used to say, I can't get 70% at Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, that is a hard number to get. And depending on the African-American turnout and depending on what percentage. So it is not a difficult math issue. You don't have to sit there and down a couple of six packs to be able to get there of how a Democrat wins. You have to have a high African-American turnout and get a high percentage of African-American turnout of that vote. And you have to get about 35% of the white vote and you win. Is that doable? Yeah. Yeah, it's doable. It is. For all this talk about how there's like the Republican Party's reinvented itself in 24 and all this stuff, it's all nonsense. Donald Trump's coalition in 20 was 85% white. Okay, he did better in 24. It was 84% white. This is a country that is, 59% white and less so since we're talking. The core of Donald Trump's support is non-college educated whites. Now, in 2000, worked on the Bush campaign, that was 60%. That's now the fastest declining large demographic in America. It's 40% and declining fast. That is the core. And did they do better with Hispanics, Republicans? Yeah. I mean, in Bush world, we got up to 44. which Trump seems to have gotten close to that. But you're still losing Hispanics. And they seem to be celebrating because only 87% of African Americans voted against him. Only 63% of Asian Americans. Only 55% of Hispanics voted against him. I don't know. I mean, in politics, you have to win, not lose by less margins. So that's all dependent upon getting these big white votes. And it is more than we talk about, all about race. I mean, it's something I don't understand why we don't talk more about. Every time I see an article that says Trump's won working class voters, you know, I think an angel should die. He didn't win working class voters. He never has won. He won white working class voters. Donald Trump has overwhelming support from evangelicals. No, only white evangelicals. Black evangelicals vote against him at 98%. So, I mean, if we were taking an SAT test and they said, white evangelicals vote for somebody at 95%, and black evangelicals vote against that person at 95%, do you think that the key element here is that they're evangelicals? I don't think we'd circle that.
Stuart, this dissident movement you talked about earlier, should it come to pass, does that come primarily from the Republican Party, from
No,
Democrats?
It has to come from the Democratic Party. It goes to a mindset of the Democratic Party. And I think this was a failing of Joe Biden's. It's almost, you know, I mean, it's hard to say, accuse somebody of thinking more of the other people than they are, of the person than they are, giving them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we were all raised, that's a good thing to do. But Biden was such a creature of the Senate. I mean, he was in the Senate basically since high school. I mean, the guy got elected at 28. It's always my God, 28. When he got elected, he was too young to serve. It was like, you know, so that's his whole world. And he was a creature of a world in which you could get bipartisan support. And that world no longer exists. And the Democratic Party has to quit trying to focus group its way to a message. You can't have a poll to remind you of your deeply held beliefs. And they have to throw all that stuff out and be passionate. Strong and wrong will always beat weak and right. And why do people go out after Bernie and AOC? It's not ideological for the most part. It's because they have passion. And that's what people want. I mean, look, I've known Bernie Sanders. I went to college. I went to Middlebury College in Vermont. I remember seeing Bernie Sanders when I was in college. I was riding my bicycle down the main street in Burlington, and there was this lunatic out there yelling about rent control. And that was Bernie Sanders running for mayor. He won by 8 votes. They called him Red Bernie. He was actually a really good mayor, as it turned out. But people forget, Bernie Sanders got elected to Congress because there was a Republican who supported the Brady bill, which was the issue then on gun control. There was a Democrat who supported the Brady bill. Bernie went to the NRA and said, I'll oppose the Brady bill if you back me. And they said, deal. And Bernie got elected as the candidate who opposed the Brady. People forget this. But Bernie Sanders, it is a true statement, Bernie Sanders is to the right of Donald Trump on foreign policy. That's mind-boggling. I think that if you believe this is an existential moment in the history of American democracy, which I think it is, you have to act accordingly. And you're not going to win by the same rules. So that's when you need to be doing stuff like saying, okay, we're going to nationalize SpaceX. We're going to cut off funding for the White House. There was a reluctance for the United States to establish an intelligence service during World War I because gentlemen don't read other gentlemen's mail. Like, we got over that, right? And started the CIA, the OSS, all of this. And I have this feeling that the Democratic Party, to this sad degree, is still living by the gentlemen don't read other gentlemen's mails rules.
Stuart, look, I know we've had you here a long while, and really appreciate you talking with us. Any in closing, anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to bring up?
Well, look, I think that the history of modern Mississippi is a very optimistic history. And, after the Romney campaign, we lost, by the way. My dad turned 95, and I had just turned 60, I guess. And so a lot of the ways that my dad and I had sort of bonded growing up was going to Ole Miss games. I grew up in Belhaven. We could walk to games when there were a lot of games in Ole Miss games still at Memorial Stadium. So I decided that he and I, my mom, gave it kind of a driving Miss Daisy quality. She was about 10 years younger than my dad. We were going to go to all the Ole Miss games in the 2013 season. So we did, and I wrote a book about it called The Last Season. And that was a weird season. Ole Miss played, I think, 6 home games in a row. So we were basically living at the inn at Ole Miss. And, my mom went to Ole Miss. My mother transferred from LSU to Ole Miss to open the chapter of Kappa Kappa Gamma. My dad gone to Ole Miss. My grandfather went to Ole Miss. I didn't. But, I spent a lot of time hanging out in the Grove. And I found that moment for those home games when the team would pull up and walk through the Grove. Great moment. And thinking about it, it was here where basically the last battle of the Civil War was fought. It was here where it took 30,000 National Guard to bring order to a town, where people died, where pitched battles were fought, where U.S. Marshals were attacked and nearly killed. For why? To stop one African American from entering the University of Mississippi. And now the only time you'd ever riot on the green is if some high-level African-American athlete decommitted to Ole Miss and said he wasn't going to come to Ole Miss and they might get out there and have a riot. And I found that very hopeful. And I think that you have to give Ole Miss a lot of credit for really trying to come to grips with its history. And it's flawed and it's imperfect, but they've really tried to do it. And Ole Miss, I think, is the most southern of the southern universities. And if we can do it in Mississippi, we can do. I think it's very, very positive. So I think that there are reasons. I mean, it's hard not to be optimistic to go to the incredible Civil Rights Museum in Jackson now and not walk out and think that we have progressed a lot. We have moved forward. And you have an effort now for renaming bases for Confederate generals, where Donald Trump is taking people who are in powerful positions, like chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who are African American, and demoting them. And that's happening a lot more than people realize. That's not going to win. That isn't where America is. You take your average 17-year-old kid in white Mississippian, he'd rather be a black rap star than Robert E. Lee. And that's the society that's going to win. And I think that the Republican Party has gotten in the unfortunate position of basically declaring war on the future. And, one thing Haley used to say is, if you're in politics, it's good to be for the future because it's going to happen anyway. And I think that Mississippi offers a very hopeful view of the future, and we should hold that and take pride in it and continue to try to do better.
Stuart, thank you very much again for coming on. And if we would like to, if we we can to extract a promise of a return sometime soon.
Listen, I'm like the crazy uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. If you invite me, I'll come. So be careful. I love what you guys are doing. I admire it so much. I think it's so important. It's another really positive sign.
Well, thank you, Stuart. Maybe you're on your next visit. We could just talk about Ole Miss sports.
I would love that, brother. As I said, Ole Miss is undefeated this season.
That's right.
Right.
We're in great shape.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you.